Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Power of Our Story. We have our guest today, Miss Jennifer Tracy. I am so excited to hear what you have to talk with us about today. A little bit about Jennifer. She shared her message of hope with countless thousands. She's highly sought after author, transformational speaker, life coach, and mental health advocate. Jennifer began her career as an inspirational speaker 5 years after the death of her husband and daughter in 2004. In her book, From the Deepest Darkness to the Light of Hope, Jennifer lets down her guard in her uniquely brave and beautiful way to allow those who are suffering inside her mind as her story lights the way to what is possible, despite the impact of multiple traumatic life experiences. Jennifer has been featured in the media on multiple news channels, in newspapers, and other outlets. The Colorado Department of Transportation honored Jennifer and her daughters on the Colorado Rockies Field for her speaking efforts. Her story of forgiveness has also reached a national audience through the Good Housekeeping magazine and Bridges CTN. To further her reach, Jennifer has a master guide to mental wellness. Her guide equips leaders with real strategies and solutions to win their mental health battles and master their personal growth. For these resources at redefineyourmission.com and learn more about her gritty faith at jennifertracy-inspired.com. Well, welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Yeah. So again, as I was kind of share with you guys just a little bit, is that okay if I lead off with prayer today?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that all right with you guys? Okay. So originally, when Sarah asked me, she asked to share my story of faith, and I know we're going to talk about some leadership as well, but I would absolutely love to just kind of start off with a prayer, if that's okay.
Yeah.
God of all creation, I thank you so much for this day. What a beautiful day it is. I know that we are spanning all across different states here, but we just come to you in this brief moment of time, and we ask that you would be in our midst. We ask that the things that we share and that we talk about, that it would give us energy, that your Holy Spirit would come and dwell with us and give us the things that we need to make it through today, the things we need to make it through tomorrow, and more importantly, to make it through the things that you have called us to do. Thank you so much for this group. I thank you so much for Sarah and for all of the protectors and those who love and support them, just this private, sacred place. And just ask that you be with us. In Jesus' name, amen. Yeah. So I thought today, guys, I would start off by sharing a little something with you that I feel like no one has ever really prepared me for what is it like to lead in the mental health space. So I don't know if you guys can kind of see sometimes people socially who will go all out. They will share their story, whether it's on Facebook or TikTok, it could be inside of LinkedIn, whatever it is, right? And they share the depths of what they're going through. And a lot of times when people do that initially, a lot of times people will rally around that post, around that person and say, wow, thank you so much for being vulnerable, whatever that story was, right? But then, and that person kind of sees like, wow, when I shared my story, that was really powerful. But then the next day, if they jump right back on that same bandwagon and say, I'm struggling with suicide this week, or, I have X, Y, and Z, or I struggle with anxiety every day. And they just kind of talk about the issue itself. And they don't really have an audience. They haven't really clearly defined, like, who am I talking to? Who am I really going to talk to when I share this story? Then I see that those people sometimes struggle, right? So it's like they had this great experience of sharing their story once, but then when they continue to share, like no one really comes back and like likes, comments, right? There's this awkwardness of when we're sharing these vulnerable stories. So 2016, I'm in front of firefighters, police officers, veterans, sharing my personal story of PTSD and what it was that I did to navigate through it. EMDR, medication, I'm breaking down the different things that I did to personally go through. And so it's just my story, right? But then I have this thing where I decide to write my book called Inside the Mind of Suicide. And while I'm writing the book, I really did not take into account how hard it would be to draw up all of the memories and then to actually sit down myself personally and write it. And so most of you, if you've been following me, you know that my battle with suicidal ideation, I'm talking like 2-year full-on battle, came before Brian and Brittany were killed. Okay, young mom, 3 little kids, no fault of my own. I'm battling suicidal ideation. I have the courage at the very end when I'm going to do it. Instead of doing it, I walk myself in and get help. Go into the psychiatric unit, in there for a while, honestly, several weeks. Come out of that 3 years later, Brian and Brittany are killed. The fact that I had walked myself into the psychiatric unit was used against me. When Brian and Brittany were killed, my mother-in-law swooped in and said, Jennifer's been in the psychiatric unit, Jennifer's not fit, all of these things, right? The very thing that we tell people to do, which is to reach out for help, don't kill yourself, right? It comes back against me, you guys. And so I had to fight for 8 months. I had to have an MMPI done, 3 days of psychological testing to make sure that I was fit. Okay, this is back in 2004. And I endured it. I endured 8 months of supervised visits, so many things that I endured to say, I won't give up fighting for my girls, no matter what it takes, right? But when we think about that, is that really fair? Is it really fair that, I never hurt my children. I didn't hurt myself. I did the thing that we tell people to do, right? So here I am, again, speaking, teaching my program, Call for Backup, in front of firefighters, police officers, and I'm writing this book, you guys. And in the midst of writing my book, this is 2016, I start battling suicidal ideation really bad. And the thing about thoughts of suicide for me is that I had already won that battle. And I already knew that those thoughts didn't define me. Okay. Like I wasn't worried about the thoughts. But what I realized during that time period, during 2016 and 2017, was that I was more worried about losing my job. I was more worried about, would that department down the street hire me to come in and talk about this topic, suicide, mental health, if they knew that I was struggling with thoughts of suicide. So that's why in my book, my very first book, Inside the Mind of Suicide, the very last chapter in this small book, okay, I have a compelling question. And the question is, should we be defined by those thoughts of suicide, or should we be defined by what we do when we have those thoughts? Okay, because I didn't ask for the thoughts, not when I was young. And I surely didn't ask for the thoughts when I was writing my book. And should my job, should my ability to show up and still do that job, and I know it's different if you're carrying a firearm, and I understand that, right? But I was still at that point trying to show up on a stage as a leader, as someone who had something to share and to say, right? And I was deeply afraid to let anyone know that I was struggling with thoughts of suicide when I wrote my first book. And I had to have this pivotal moment, you guys, where I looked at myself, and this is where leadership really comes in. I looked at myself in the mirror. I'll never forget this. I'm in the bathroom and I'm like, Jennifer, you get up all the time in front of people and encourage them, inspire them to do all kinds of things when they're at this point. What is it that you would tell someone to do, Jennifer, in your exact circumstances right now? Just like, Jennifer, get out of yourself, this situation that you're in, and what is it that you would tell them to do? And so I wrote it all down, scribbled. Okay. And again, it's in the last chapter of Inside the Mind of Suicide, that list. And here's the thing, you guys, I came up with like 12 or 13 things, and then I went and did it. And so the first thing I did was I went in, I talked to my doctor, my primary care. He made sure my thyroid was okay. He checked me out physically, said, "You're okay." I got in to see my therapist. My therapist said, "Whoa, Jennifer, I haven't seen you at this state in, like, I'd already had brain surgery, guys. Like, I wasn't suicidal when I had brain surgery. Like, okay." He's like, "Wow." He's like, this is my therapist. He said, "I think writing this book is too much for you right now. And I really want to encourage you to set the book down for as long as it takes. And let's see if that stops the thoughts of suicide." Okay. Do you know how hard it is when you've already put out to the world that your book is coming out? It's coming out on August 11th, whatever, right? And then you have to set that book down because basically behind the scene, you're struggling. It's hard, right? I was petrified that when these departments would hire me to come in and speak, I was petrified that anyone found out that I was struggling silently with thoughts of suicide, that they would not allow me to work. And what you have to understand, you guys, is I was on disability, working my way off disability. And so I had nothing. Having to work was like vital. Like, it was vital to like keeping my lights on. And that's the complexity that our firefighters and first responders really, really face. Is if I'm honest about what I'm going through, it's not just that it's our pride, it's that everything you've actually worked for, the 5 years, the 7 years, the 12 years, all of that is at risk. And it was in that moment where I truly said, oh my gosh, this is why leaders in this moment have tough decisions to make, because I'm damned if I do and I'm damned if I don't. Right? And so you guys see me where it's like, the thing is we can bring awareness to this stuff, but until we have safe places to share what's going on, we're going to suffer silently. Because if we're all going to lose our job, or if we're going to have to suffer huge consequences by being honest about what's going on, then we're not going to talk, right? So it's not just an us problem. It's not just a like, I'm prideful or I'm afraid. It's that if I am honest, then X, Y, and Z might happen, right? So that was kind of that leadership moment for me of having to sit back and say, am I going to be someone who practices what I preach? Am I going to do what it takes behind the scene to get myself well so that I can sustain what I'm doing? And you guys, I did. I put the book down, put it down for 3 or 4 months, and I went on to do 18 speaking engagements that year, paid. And I share that with you because that was my thing that I had to figure out, was that writing the book was just too much and I needed some space between it, right? So I was able to pick the book back up, finish the book, put it back out. This is 2017. It's on Amazon. It has 14 stars. Okay. Like, the book still sells, you guys. It's like at number 5 right now. Okay. The book still sells. So fast forward to the last 3 years that we've all endured through this pandemic. I moved out to Florida 4 years ago, 5 years ago. Great shape, really in one of the best mindsets I've been in. I had worked so hard. Codependency was probably the biggest thing that I have fought my whole life. And for me to take a huge step and move to Florida by myself was big. Come out here doing well, connect with BNI Business Network International. It's an organization where entrepreneurs and businesses meet. You know, I'm meeting people at church, really doing well, guys. Meet Jeremy, the love of my life. He is a huge source of strength for me, right? Going well. We decide to move to Tallahassee. Pandemic. I get up here to Tallahassee, guys. No church, no gym, no BNI, nowhere to go. And if you go in the grocery store, you're putting a mask on. And in the midst of all of this, I've had 4 family members die in the last 2-3 years. And one of them is my brother, who was more than a brother to me. Okay. And so now you look at me and you look at me through this lens today and you're like, wow, Jennifer, well, you like out there leading every single day inside of LinkedIn, right? Like there have been very few days that I have not showed up inside of LinkedIn to post. How is it that I have sustained that then as a leader when behind the scene I'm grieving? And that's kind of the nugget that I really wanted to share with you guys today. As a coach, when I'm talking with leaders, fire chiefs, first responders, like people who, when others look at them, they have to look a certain way. They have to act a certain way. One of the things that I love to do is to break down that stuff behind the scene and kind of come up with like 4 or 5 different things that they can do so that they don't feel like they're a fraud. Because that's one of the deepest pains during that moment, during that time back in 2017 when I was writing my book was, what? I can't get up and talk to these people about PTSD. I can't run this program that I've created. I can't do these things if I'm struggling silently over here. So let's remove the struggle silently. Okay. So that's kind of one of my very first things is like, whatever it is that you're struggling with, if it's addiction, if it's gambling, if it's self-hatred, if it's cutting, if thoughts of suicide, you have to find your 2 or 3 people that you can be brutally honest with so that when you show up and they support the work that you're doing, okay? So that when you show up, you no longer are sitting there going, well, I'm a fraud, I'm a fake. I'm sitting here telling you guys all of these things when behind the scenes, I'm struggling with X, Y, and Z. But if you remove the silently and you're being honest about what you're going through with 2 or 3 trusted people, then you can show up in confidence. And that is something that I've done, you guys. You can look at the way that I have led over the last 2 or 3 years, even though I've struggled behind the scenes with a lot of things. And for a time, Sarah, you were like my go-to person in regard to Sean, my brother. Just that ability to say to you, like, I'm not okay today. I've been crying for 3 weeks straight because I lost my brother to suicide, right? The ability for me to check in with you and let you know that I was not okay gave me the ability to still show up and lead from the front and say, I can still talk about all these other things because all of you guys still need to know that I've still overcome this and this and this and this and this, right? So that's kind of my first thing that I share with people as a leader is remove the suffering silently, okay? The second thing is I created this 1 to 7 rule. And what that means is I have 7 things that I will talk about. So one of them is anxiety, one of them is triggers, one of them is that Brian and Brittany have been killed, one of them is that I struggled in relationships profoundly after Brian and Brittany were killed, right? I have 7 different things, okay? What you'll see is that my 1 through 5 are things that I am willing, I've given myself permission to share publicly. But do you guys remember when I was talking to you earlier, how some people, when they share what they're going through, it's like they share something and then the next time they share it, they don't know quite how to share it. And so people don't engage, people don't know how to respond, right? So when you're talking about the 1 through 5, you have to really identify who is your ideal client? Who is the person who needs to hear what you're talking about? So inside of LinkedIn, I did an article and I said, this grown ass woman just cried on an airplane today. Okay. But inside of that post, I talk about how I'm on a plane, I'm heading out for a funeral, and I'm triggered. And all of a sudden on this plane, I realized I'm not going to be able to control the trigger and I'm going to be crying. I was uncomfortable. I didn't want the flight attendant to worry about me. Like I'm sitting and I went within myself and I was like, why am I so upset about all of this, right? And then I asked myself this question, Jennifer, what do you need right now? And the answer was that I wanted to assure the flight attendant I was okay. Like I wasn't okay, but I didn't need her to check on me. I didn't want her pity and I didn't want any attention. And so I stood up from my seat, tears rolling down my face, and I walked up to her and I looked at her and she looked at me and I put my hand just slightly on her shoulder. I didn't want to freak her out, but I just said, ma'am, I want to let you know that I'm headed out for a funeral. I'm really, really upset. And I'll probably, this whole 2 hours, 2.5 hours on this flight, I'll probably cry the whole time. And I wanted to let you know, like, I just need some space. Like, I'm okay, I'm not, but like, I'm fine. Just leave me alone. And she just looked at me and she said, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that with me. So do you see how inside of LinkedIn, I'm sharing that this grown-ass woman just cried, right? I'm a leader. I'm someone that people look to, right? To navigate these kind of things. But I'm also showing, why did I share that article? Because at the end of that article, I said, but here's the problem. Is it really okay not to be okay? If you're a firefighter or an EMT and you show up on scene and you're triggered like I was, and you're trying to put an IV in, and all of a sudden you have a PTSD trigger and you're crying on scene, is that really okay? I mean, it should be, but it's not, right? Because in those moments, you have to be able to do your job, your life-saving job. And that was the complexity, guys, right? Because at the end of that article, what I was saying is, it was okay for me not to be okay on the airplane because lives were not at risk. And I was able to ask for what I wanted. But when you are a firefighter or a police officer and you have to override and do all of these other things, it becomes very complex, right? And so what those people need in that moment is permission to go get help, to fix it, to rebuild it so that they can come back and not have the fear of losing their job. If you've been an EMT or a firefighter or police officer for 8 years, and all of a sudden you show up on scene, and I can't tell you how many of you guys have said to me, you hold it all together, you do all the things that you're supposed to do, and then the second you get back in your vehicle, you lose your shit, right? And it shouldn't be that way. And you do it for how long, how many years? And then we wonder why people are dying by suicide. Yeah, it's a big problem, right? And so again, in the article, the way I talk about the anxiety, the way I talk about the trigger is so that it'll benefit those who hear what I'm sharing, right? I wasn't just sharing this story for applaud, right? It's so that whoever I'm talking to can take something away and say, wow, she advocated for herself. She took her power back in that moment, right? That's why I continue to share the things that I do so that people can take something from it, put it into their own life. And so it brings me kind of to the final thing that I wanted to share with you guys today about being a leader right now in this mental health space is like that 1 through 7. I have 2 things that I absolutely will not share publicly. And it's important as a mental health leader, especially for me, okay, any kind of leader, but I mean, no matter who you are, that whatever your 6 and your 7 are, again, you've got your sacred people that you're talking to about that. But those 6 and 7s are the things that could get you to lose your job. Those 6 or 7s, even though I wish that the world was grand and would accept my 6 and 7, if I shared what it was right now inside of LinkedIn, as much as people would want to still say, well, I'll give space for Jennifer to struggle with that. As much as you all think that I'm amazing, I've gone through amazing things, if I share what my 6 and 7 was, you'd all might go, I don't know. And think about this. If you're a firefighter, and right before you're getting ready to run into a scene, your lieutenant says, hey man, last night I had a gun in my mouth. I thought about killing myself. Can you really trust that lieutenant when you're about to run into a fire and save a life? And it's just that being human aspect of us, right? That if you share with those who are in close proximity, that 6 and 7, it makes it hard for them to trust you in those moments, right? And yet, are we allowed to have our 6 and 7, whatever it is? It could be gambling, it could be addiction, right? It can be thoughts of suicide. Do you see what I'm saying here, guys? How this sets me up as a leader to be able to say, I will continue to teach about this one and this one and this one and this one. But because if I share this, you might go, And I just like to give people permission to first identify what is that for you. Have those people that you share that with privately. And then you don't beat yourself up behind the scene because you're struggling with that. What you do is you stay focused on growth. You stay focused on rebuilding. You stay focused on how far you come. You guys, making my way through codependency and relationship struggles and failures and all of those things, right? Every time that I would struggle with that, I had to look at myself in the mirror and say, Jennifer, people who've gone through what you've gone through die. They die from drug overdose. They gain 500 pounds. They never leave the house. They never drive another car again. They're high on meth. Like the list is crazy, right? Of all the things that I could have been when Brian and Brittany were killed, right? And I have to have the deepest compassion for myself for all of the things that I have done well. But that compassion does not excuse me from being honest and looking at the areas that I'm still struggling in. And so when I'm honest about the areas that I'm still struggling in, is always through the lens of compassion. It's through the lens of how far I've come and saying, I can still work on this other thing little by little. And you guys, for me to come out to Florida, 40 something years old, and to finally say, like, I'm married to Jeremy. He travels a lot. Sometimes I'm home like for a week and I'm like, enjoy the house by myself. Like, I wish you could understand the different Jennifer, where when the younger me, I can't even imagine being home alone, much less my spouse traveling without me for a week and me being fine. Like, sometimes I look in the mirror, I'm like, who am I? Like, and I say that with you because I never gave up. I never gave up fighting ways to be less codependent. Why was I codependent? Healing the parts of me that needed to be healed, right? So the last thing as a leader that I just want to share with you guys is when you air your dirty laundry, and again, not your 6 and 7, okay? But when you air your dirty laundry, it makes you a way better leader. It removes all of this pressure of having to be perfect. And there are a lot of people that I see right now who are out there who are in the mental health space. And they have healed, right? They've gone through what they've gone through, and now they've reached this place of healing. And what can be dangerous about this place is that you've never really attained like, oh, I've healed, so now life is bliss. Okay, because once you reach like, I've healed X, Y, and Z, well, now I'm an empty nester. Well, now my kids aren't at home. Oh my gosh, last year, both of my daughters got married in the same year. Are you freaking kidding me? Right? Like, and so I've had to dip back into things to take care of myself. I have a therapist that I see. Right? Does that make sense? And so by being honest about those things, it's never like, oh, I have attained, I'm on a pedestal, and now there's nothing that can ever knock me off that. And so I will air my dirty laundry that way. I never feel like I have to be on this pedestal and look a certain way to you guys. Does that make sense? So that's kind of my like leadership stuff, is that's how I have, successfully navigated, I would say, the last 3 years. And it's been bad, guys. It's been tough to navigate 4 family members dying. And 3 of them, like, there were no memorials. There were no funerals because we weren't allowed to go. We couldn't get on an airplane. And part of how I'm here is because I do think I grieve well. When Brian died, I took all of his shirts and I made them into a beautiful quilt for both of my daughters. I cut up all of the shirts. They were pressed, beautiful shirts that he just loved. And I made these quilts, and on the back of the quilt, I just wrote something to them, of love from their dad. And both girls just treasure those quilts that I made out of their dad's shirt, right? So I think I grieved well. And the last 3 years, I feel like that's been robbed of me. I couldn't go to my grandmother's service and take some of the flowers home from her service and dry them and incorporate them into the things that I have here, right? I was robbed of those things that I normally would do to help myself. And so that's where my therapist has been good for me, is helping me say, okay, John, you couldn't do these things that you normally would do. So what can we do instead? You know, so, and I love that I've got my therapist, because she's just such a good sounding board for me when I'm on days, again, you know, where I'm like, I'm out here trying to lead and teaching and all of these kind of things. And yet I'm struggling, you know, especially with anxiety, guys. That's probably my biggest thing, is just the anxiety and the triggers. And I hate that. I hate that part about that trigger. And so, you know, just kind of being honest about that. I'd say really the other thing is, how does faith really play into this for me? And I just, you know, when I was a little girl, I read the Bible twice all the way through. And when we're done and we kind of open this up for questions, I want to share some stuff with you guys about how did I really dissect the Bible, and how do I use that tangibly day in and day out? And what I mean by that is, if you look at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you identify that there are really three audiences that Jesus dealt with. When you identify those three different audiences that Jesus dealt with, and then you always ask yourself, who am I in this picture? Am I this one? Am I this one? Or am I this one? And when you can identify the way that he behaved towards those who were struggling, towards the humble, towards the people who came to him and said, why do I keep doing the things I don't want to do? When you can identify that you're that person in that story, then you know that you are good this way. You are always good this way, when you can come to him and identify that you are one of those people who has a heart like David. Because there's two other audiences that Jesus dealt with, right? And when you can identify this other audience and then this other audience, and you say, keep me out of that audience, right? It makes it easier for you to know that you are well with God. And that has been a huge source of strength for me, guys, is to be able to say, despite all of this, there is a God who looks at me and says, you are chosen, you are redeemed, you are valued. I love you. I'm not going anywhere. I see your mess. I'm not afraid, right? So, so that's kind of the last piece of how deeply my faith has sustained me, is really leaning in on that part of it. So there you have it. As far as today, I, just kind of shared three of my leadership things: the airing the dirty laundry, the 1 through 7 technique, and then just about being honest of struggling. And that way you never feel like, oh my gosh, if people knew I was doing X, Y, and Z, that they would think differently about you. So I can't wait to hear what you guys think about that.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. I literally have a whole page of notes. I think that was great, but it really struck home with me because during the last half of my career, I was a supervisor for the communication center. And I know one of my biggest battles when I started my leave from work, besides the isolation that I dealt with, was during the most critical part of the incident that I worked. I judged myself because I felt my voice break when I turned around and talked to my employees about what I just heard on the phone.
Right.
And I struggled for a while with that. And I actually ended up having lunch with one of the other dispatchers who was there working that day. And I told her, I'm sorry. I feel like I let you guys down. I wasn't a good leader. And she just had this look of shock in her face. And she said, Michelle, there was no other supervisor we would have wanted to go through that incident with. So I think it's so interesting how we are not compassionate with ourselves, and we are so much harder on ourselves. So I love that you talked about that with having the compassion and making sure that that's the lens that you use to look through.
Mhm.
So I also wanted to ask you, when you put your book down, did you struggle with feelings of failing because
Oh,
you had to step
absolutely.
away? How
Oh,
did you
yeah.
fight through that?
Yeah, it was painful. But what's amazing, guys, is that chapter in the book is called Tell the Truth, the Whole Truth, and Nothing But the Truth. And what I finally say in that chapter is I said, I had to decide back then whether or not I would include what I just shared with you guys in the book. And back then in this one, I put it in. So when I finally put this out, I actually share in this book that before, while I was writing this, that I battled thoughts of suicide and that I had to put the book down. And it was scary as all hell to share that book back in 2017 as a woman trying to lead in a space about PTSD and trauma and grief and all that stuff, and to put it in a book and say, yeah, while I was writing this, I struggled, and so I had to put it down. It was really tough to walk away from it. But there's a line in that chapter that says, you can't work if you're dead. So this
true.
job, this calling that you've signed up for, it will mean nothing if you're dead.
Yeah.
And like, as blunt as that is, I had to have that logical thing and say, okay, well, as hard as this is to put my book down, if I'm dead, because I keep moving, you know, I keep going and I keep battling, and then I put myself at risk of killing myself, then I won't even have a book and I won't even be here. Right? Like you can't work if you're dead.
I think
So
it's so simplistic.
it
So
is so
logical.
logical, right? And like
Yeah.
when people get to that point in my book, especially people who've been struggling silently, like they'll message me with it like circled and they're like, like, it's so logical. Well, you can't work if you're dead. You know, you can't uphold this calling if you're dead. And I'm laughing, right? But it's so serious. I mean, we know, I can't tell you how many people, you know, have shared that they put themselves at risk hoping to die in the line of work.
Yeah.
Right? Because they don't want to go out this other way. And so again, think of how smart that is. Instead of recognizing how smart that is, I mean, it's not a risk that I want people to do. I don't want people to end their lives that way, right? But they're actually saying, if I just end my life, I'm going to hurt my family. My family won't get benefits, right? And so they're making these calculated decisions to try to still protect their family, even when they're in the midst of insane battles themselves, right? And if that is not hero, if that is not amazing, right? How many of you guys endure for so long, and yet that's not the way you see yourselves when you look in the mirror? And that's the part that has to change, right? That's that part that was there for me, was during those moments I did not look at myself in the mirror and say, you're a failure, Jennifer. And that's because I knew I was good with God.
Well, and I think that's important too, is to know that we also don't get the privilege of seeing the bigger picture. And you talked about how you put that book down and then you had 18 of those paid speaking engagements that year. I mean, who knows? That may not have happened, and all the people you affected. And then you go on and it's how many years later and your book is still one of the top ones out there. So I think it's so important to recognize that we don't always see the bigger picture. God does. And sometimes it's, like you said, being right with him and having the faith.
Yeah. And that's, again, so writing the second edition and writing that final chapter is called Home, and I get to write about Jeremy, and just really finally realizing all of these years later, because I think the final piece of my healing was anytime I would try to dip my toes into full out joy and full out living, I felt like I was leaving Brittany behind. And it's something that parents, especially moms who lose a child, really struggle with, is anything that looks like moving on. And if you were to bring a freshly bereaved mother to me right now, and I was to share with her my day, the things I do, even the smile on my face today, the way that I presented, she would look at me like there is something incredibly wrong with me. Because as a freshly bereaved mother, I mean, you cannot imagine life at all ever looking good ever again. So when you see someone like me, 5, 6, 8, 18 years later, like you're like, there's got to be something wrong with them. Like, because it just doesn't seem like possible.
Yeah.
So for me to write the final chapter of Home and to say, okay, home is not a place I live. Home is where those I love are. And so that means home is in heaven with Brittany and Jesus and my mom and my family. And home is here with my love, Jeremy. But home is also now in Maine where Michaela and her husband live. And home is in Colorado, right? And so it's this transcending thing that I finally had to say, okay. Because I don't know about you guys, you know, when I was younger, a real physical home that I got to decorate and have people over, like it meant everything to me. Like my real physical home was like, it meant so much to me. So.
That's great. Thank you again.
Yeah.
If anyone else has anything they want to talk about, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I really appreciate you, Jennifer, and your vulnerability and your strength.
Thank you.
I see both the vulnerability and the strength, and a lot of things moved me in what you said, but I cannot talk about everything, so I'm going to focus on a few things that I thought were really very, I mean, touched me in a certain way. I believe that it's just usually your weakness can become your strength if you let God use it. I work with a lot of young teenagers that are super depressed, and because I know that there's a crisis right now of suicide with young girls. And I experienced that myself. My mom committed suicide. And so I really understand the emptiness that stay there, and the you know, those things where you cannot I call those experience, they are beyond normal human experience.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't have God, it's very hard to make sense of it and to overcome it in a way where you let God use it.
Mm-hmm.
So I can relate with, not with exactly your experience, but with losing someone that violently.
Mm-hmm.
And but the other thing that I really, that's why I really appreciate, I think your strength can become your weakness. I talked before when we talked last time about wounded healer, because I do believe that your wounds can be healing to other people.
Mm-hmm.
If you let God use it. The other thing that I really found really powerful is when you talked about the 5 things that you share, but you keep 2 that you don't share because they can hurt people, those two. And
Yep.
I look at it in a way that when you are in leadership and when you help people, there's certain things you cannot put on the table with everybody. You need to have your specific people that you can share with, and they know you, and they're not going to be scared. They're just going to be there with you.
Mm-hmm.
But if you share it out there, you are rocking a lot of people, and it's not constructive.
Yep.
I will say I see it not only as a leader, but I see it because I do believe that a mother and a father are leaders. And for me, it hurt me a lot to hear when I was a kid, my mom sharing certain thing about her desire to die and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it hurt me for years. It took me a long time to recover from it. So I do believe, though, that if you're a parent, you're a leader.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're an adult, in one way or another, you're going to lead. And there's certain things when you share, you need to pick the people you're going to share those very deep things that are the last 2.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you share it with some other people, you're going to damage them and you're going to hurt them. And I think that's why I call it wisdom.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to say, I mean, it's
the wisdom to know that openness with everybody is great, but there's certain things that you need to compartmentalize. There's certain things that cannot go to certain people because they cannot handle it. Your
Yep.
kids will never be able to handle certain things that are if you share with them, because there's a boundary there, you need to protect them.
Yep.
And so-
Yeah. I mean, and again, that's like where you have to realize, like, who's your audience, who you're talking to, right? So if you're in a teen space, I mean, when you're talking with them, you have to take into account that they don't have critical thinking intact, right? And so when you're thinking about, well, what are those 5 things that I'm going to share with these people? Like, you really got to like focus in on, what are 5 things that I could share with them about myself?
Yeah.
That would help them. That's still safe to share. However, I'm not going to say X, Y, and Z, right? And it's the same thing. Like if you're in a relationship with a spouse, you know, and you're struggling, right? If you're a firefighter and you're struggling in a relationship, there are certain things that you should share your 1 through 5 with them. And then if there's something else that would be damaging to that spouse for them to know yet or whatever, that's where you work on that behind the scenes with that other person while you're growing through that, right?
Yeah.
So it's just a way that I've navigated that's worked for me.
And I think that's fantastic. And I think for people that are, policemen, firefighter, all these, those things you have, or nurses or doctors or therapists, there's certain things that you have to be able to protect the people that you are in some way leading, because they are coming to you for help.
Yeah.
And you need to help, not damage.
Yeah.
And so I like this wisdom of those 2 things, that you need to compartmentalize and choose with whom you share that, because some people, it will hurt them. It's
Yep.
always really the attitude of vulnerability and openness, yes, but not just not using people as an emotional trash compactor.
Yeah. Sarah, did you have something?
Thank you.
Yes. Jennifer, I just want to say, oh, friend, well done. Well done. Well done. I mean,
Thank you.
you so deeply articulated things that are so important. And again, like Baya was saying, there's so many angles that I could go on this, but I just want to camp out on a couple. I really loved, I was thinking this is very interesting, but my loss of my dad by suicide, Baya's loss of her mom by suicide, and Brittany and Brian, your loss, it all happened actually around the same time. This is really interesting. So I know that, gosh, have we had to learn the hard way on many fronts, haven't we? And I would say probably many of us, I know Dr. Arnell was sharing some great losses last night. And, I mean, really hearing, Michelle and Goodell, like there has been, I don't know, Jim as well. But there's been so much that we've all have gone through. And gosh, if there is a way to help people navigate this very vulnerable time, like what you said, compassion for ourselves. Wow. When I was totally, absolutely blindsided, if I had held on to that too, I just thought, Sarah, are you like losing it? Just the critical thoughts that can happen and the shame of, of course, if you lose, your loved one to suicide, you're not going to be running all 4 cylinders. And I think too, the instruction and the guidance of being discerning is so important. Just about, you want to be able to be open. And I feel like this with the power of our story, I feel very protective of people, as I think you guys know. Like if I am concerned about somebody who just shared their story, I won't post it on YouTube. Maybe we can have a talk later, but I just think, oh, I don't want any regrets in this vulnerable area. Let's hold off. And I just think the discernment, what you were saying, these are 5 things that I'm ready to share. 2 things, and not only for other people, but for ourselves. If we are still vulnerable, if we are still raw, I think probably quite a few of us have learned the hard way too. I have been very vulnerable too soon with people who did not have the empathy or see the sacredness of what was just happening
Mhm.
and exploited it with no conscience. And that was actually devastating to realize that I felt that betrayed. I'm only sharing this too out of protection for other people. I feel very, healed and whole, and my life is full of joy. I'm very happy to be able to share that. But I do feel using that pain of the past to protect other people in their healing is very important to me and a foundation of the power of our story. So Jennifer, I just want to thank you again. How you shared, how you articulated this journey is just so beautiful and so powerful. Like I don't hear people articulate this with the depth of vulnerability that you have. Thank you. Thank you for your courage.
Yeah, thank you.
Goodell, go ahead.
Hey, thank you, Michelle. Jennifer, I'm lost for words. Really, it's a lot to unpack, and I'm kind of, I guess, chewing on it a bit. And I want to thank you for, again, the vulnerability and sharing, and I mean that it takes a lot to do that, and it's just your courage is exemplary. So just to share one word on many other things. I'm looking forward. I'm really looking forward to, the subscription that you're going to have, and here in February, definitely count me in. I know I'm there. I can relate to you in more than one way. And you really hit the nail on the head, when you talk about that 6 and 7, the stuff that you don't want to talk about, and it's something that I talk about as well, or think of as well. And man, it's hard, it's difficult. Sarah knows a little bit about what happened to me, and continues to happen to me, because it's almost like a never-ending thing. And I can tell you that the federal government has no pity whatsoever. Yep. They nothing, and I'm like, I'm going through it. So I'm struggling right now. Yesterday was a really hard day. It's really, really tough. But I'm still chucking. I'm looking forward to reading your book. I really want to read it. Reading some of the, testimonies and all that. I'm like, man, this is awesome. I'm like, I need to, why didn't I connect with you before? I did send you a connection. I'm thinking the perspective, I've always said that the perspective of a woman is it's that touch. There's a different touch that women have over talking about this than a guy would. We're more cowards when it comes to stuff like this. I'm not going to talk about that. You're going to think less of me. You're going to think I'm less manly, but it's not about that. I'm besides, my favorite titles being dad, being hubby, a brother, sister, all that. I'm a follower of Jesus above all, and I'm a Bible talk leader in our church, and even there's a lot of turmoil going on now, and I'm like, I need to cling on more than ever, and like-minded individuals such as yourselves are the reason that I keep going, Jennifer. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm hoping we can become good friends. I'd like to chat more with you, and I'm here, whatever you need. I'm try to be a good friend, but even more so a better brother in Christ, if you will.
Thank you. And that's this year, that's really my prayer every day is Sarah knows me, and she knows that the way that I've written both of my books, it's very universal. It's very respectful. If you're a Christian and you read my book, there's no doubt that I love Jesus. But I don't even think I ever say his name in the book. I do have a chapter called When God Ran, and I talk about God running towards me when I threw away my faith after I was so angry, right? And so I bring up that kind of love of God in the book. It's smack dab. It's like chapter 7 or 8 after I feel like I've gained your know, like, and trust, then I kind of introduce you to my God a little bit. But this year for me, and I'm a bit afraid to do it. And so, I covet your prayers in this, is I want to connect deeper with people who love Jesus and want to talk about him, not in a religious setting, but in a setting of how does he really fit in our everyday life? Because I love to talk about Jesus. And I wouldn't be here without him, but I'm afraid to talk about him because I'm very sensitive. And what I mean by that, you guys, is if you look at the way that the world, like Lauren Daigle, she's a Christian artist and I just love her music, but she'll put a song out and people just bash her. And I mean, people will come at her and say, how dare you go on Ellen DeGeneres show? You're not a Christian because you went on our show. And I'm just saying, like, I see what happens to these other people who are out there and they're just being kind, loving Jesus people. And so when I say to you that I'm afraid, I don't mean afraid like physical, is that I'm a warrior in nature by nature. And so I don't know how Lauren Daigle just bows out and lets people say things like that, because I'd be like, really? You want to go in my arena? Come on, let's chat. Let's go. Let's get back on Ellen. Let's have a chat about this, because that's my nature, is like, you want to say something like that to me behind the scene, like on a computer? No. You're going to call me out about my Jesus? Let's go on TV live in front of everyone and have this conversation, because I'll do that any day, right? So I'm more afraid of my warrior spirit of like, you're not going to like that. And that's that part where I was telling you there's 3 audiences that Jesus dealt with, guys. The hypocrites, the people who thought their shit didn't stink, you guys, he did not walk by that and turn his face and let them act that way. He didn't. He was kind, but he looked at them and he said, not on my watch. Right? He's
Yep.
feeding a widow on the Sabbath and they're like giving him shit about it. And he's like, right? So do you hear, right? So that's why I'm saying, when you identify who you are in that audience of Christ, then you know that you're always good with him. But there's a certain area of Jesus where he was fierce, you guys, where he did not put up with certain things. And so when I tell you I'm afraid, it's like, oh, God, help me, because I got to be ready for that. Does that make sense? Like, it's not easy for me if someone attacks me publicly in a thread like that to just be like, oh, whatever, you can say whatever you want. I'm like, no. So starting small is going to be good for me.
Keep, if I could put in one little thing, just keep embracing humility. Keep embracing humility. You can still be a warrior, and humility will keep you grounded in the spirit. Right. I know. I mean, I think about these things a lot too, because I just, you get really angry, especially in protection mode, things can come up,
protection mode. And you guys, I've won over some pretty amazing people inside of LinkedIn. Like I've watched people say mean things in LinkedIn. And I have it's a 4-part communication technique that I created. It's called Speak and Be Heard. And I use this technique when people are being mean and bullying other people inside of like messaging threads. And I've actually won people over by the way I've called them out, but in a kind, loving way. And they will privately message me and say, whoa. And then the next thing I know, they're following me and like all my posts inside of LinkedIn. And so I feel like that part is the gift. It's just on a larger scale. But so anyway, I'm looking forward to this year doing more community with people inside who want to talk about these kind of things, but we talk about Jesus too.
Does anyone else have anything they want to say? Go ahead, Dr. Pam.
I just want to say, I think you did an amazing job. I'm very strong with my faith as well. My faith is where I have been able to take all of the things that I've experienced and help mold to who I am today. I too would be like you and want to go back on the Ellen show and confront everybody. So I get what you're saying. I understand that completely. But then I also have to remember, Jesus didn't back down. And
Yeah.
so he's not going to expect us to back down. And when we're doing something that is according to his word and what he is wanting, he's going to give us the strength, and he's going to move those mountains, and he's going to give us the favor that we need to do what we need to do for him. So keep going, girl.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Well, Jennifer, I just want to say thank you again so much for coming
Yeah.
on today. I don't know about everyone else, but I've gotten so many great tidbits to think about and work into my daily life. So, Sarah, did you want to stop the recording?